organisations about why people have left their jobs. And so what we did is we went to 2,000 people. 2,000 people completed a survey saying that they had left a job within recent times, and these were the reasons why they left their jobs. So the way you undertake such a piece of research is that you undertake an analysis of the types of people that should be asked the question. You then undertake a decision about the sorts of questions we should ask them. And you'll see that on this slide we talk about understand why people leave their jobs. That's the objective of the exercise. But what we did is we also did a literature review about why people leave jobs generally. And there is quite a bit of research into why people leave their jobs. And so in general, the reasons that people leave their jobs fall into the categories of what you would call push factors and pull factors. So push factors are things that cause people to want to leave their jobs because of the fact that there's something that they don't like about their jobs. So in short, they're being pushed away. Pull factors are things where a person leaves their job because they are being tempted away for some reason. And so the tempted away for some reason might well be that they get a more attractive opportunity, or there's something about another job which is just so impossible to refuse that they take that other job. So we're going to take you through some results about the SACS study. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is that if you look at the things that we identified in this process, what we see is that there are many, many of these reasons for people changing jobs that are actually under the control of an employing organisation. So that's the subject matter of what we're going to cover off today. For those of you who are taking notes about this, one of the things, I tell you two things. I get lots of requests for opportunities to send the webinar to other people. We are recording this webinar, and so we can send you a link for that recording if you want it, but as well as that, if people want copies of the notes, you can have that as well. You will get feedback from this, and when you get the feedback, you can express an interest as to whether you want the notes or the recording or whatever. All right, so let's talk about push factors. So here are some examples. We looked at many examples of why people leave work in terms of push factors, the things that drive employees away from their current employment. And here are a few of them. One is that the job or the workplace wasn't as I expected it to be. Incidentally, we've done many workforce planning exercises where we've found this to be a common problem, where you model the reasons for people leaving, or you model the frequency of people leaving organisations. Quite often you find that people, provided they can make it through the first year or so, they stay. And in some organisations this is really quite endemic, where their hotspot for staff turnover is actually people leaving after joining the organisation. And the reason is that the job turns out to be different, or the organisation turns out to be different from what I expected. And so rather than sticking around, I'll go and find something else. Too little coaching or feedback, too few advancement opportunities, feeling devalued or unrecognised, stress, loss of trust, being encouraged to leave but not fired, lack of training and development opportunities, and I don't have meaningful work. The work that I'm doing is just not meaningful. So they are all examples of what you would call push factors. Then there are pull factors. So pull factors are factors that entice employees to other jobs. Things like money. I got paid more to go to this new job. Now you'll notice that a push factor can be I am being underpaid, but that's a totally different thing from the pull factor of I got a chance to earn more money. People could be happy with what they're paid but still leave to take another job somewhere else. Although I'd have to say that, when you see the results, the question of leaving jobs to get paid more is not a really common reason for leaving jobs. And certainly feeling that I'm not getting paid enough is an absolutely rare reason for leaving jobs. People move to other jobs. Pull factors could be advancement or career progression. Work-life balance could be a pull factor. I'm retiring. That's a pull factor. Unexpected opportunities or headhunted. In other words, I got called about a job and I just couldn't say no. Mobility, which means I'm decided to go to the UK, or I've decided to follow a partner or something. They're all pull factors. Family situation is a pull factor. Further study could be a pull factor. Environmental factors could be, and I suppose one of the examples of that is that I have had situations where people move because of the fact that it's going to be more convenient to get to work, or there's something more attractive about this workplace. They're what you would call environmental factors, provided that they're not psychosocial things like the colleagues that we have or any of those sorts of things. They're all covered under a different category. So what we did is we went and surveyed 2,000 people, and here's what the data looks like. We did this in early 2016. The people who responded were Australia-wide. We had in excess of 2,000 people who completed this survey. And interestingly, one of the things that we found, we get this a lot. I mean, you know, sometimes when people do this kind of research, they end up with samples that are predominantly male or predominantly female. As you can see, it's pretty much 50-50, and slightly more females than males, but pretty much 50-50. The age breakdown you see there, and we measured the push factors and pull factors, and we asked 49 questions, of which some were push factors and some were pull factors. And one of the things that we ended up with is, because we did this study, and 2000 is quite a big study, I think you can conclude that the findings are what we would call normative. In other words, they're representative enough that you could rely on them as being guidance about the population generally. So that's what this sample was like. Now, one of the other things is that the 49 questions that we asked, we drew them from the research that was done into push and pull factors previously, but we also ran all of these questions through a validation process to make sure that they performed mathematically appropriately to be considered to be good measurement tools, and they are. They stand up really, really well, as a matter of fact. And so we will be using those in further measurement instruments, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that before we finish this webinar. So the questions asked, and so here were some examples. The work I was asked to do was different from what I expected. The team that I joined was different from what I expected. Organisation was different from what I expected. You can see those three things are quite different in themselves. So the job, you can be happy with a job or unhappy with your team, or happy with the team but unhappy with the organisation. I didn't feel confident that I had the skills. Employer didn't place enough emphasis on building skills. Not enough clarity about what constituted job performance, didn't receive clear performance feedback, encouraged to leave, negative relationship with the person I reported to. Anyway, you get the picture. Those are some of the questions that were asked. Here's some more of them. Too much red tape. My colleagues were not supportive, didn't find the work meaningful. Fixed term role which finished. My colleagues were negative and cynical. Anyway, you get the picture. They're all reasons for leaving, some of which push factors, some of them pull factors. So let's show you what we found. Now, this is the overall results in terms of the averages of the scores that we got for these things. So 5 means strongly agree, 1 means strongly disagree. And so you've got a 5-point, for those of you who are into science of this sort, a Likert scale. So a 5-point Likert scale. And you can see, move to a more exciting opportunity. That's the most common reason why people leave jobs. But look at this. The second most common reason is absence of clear performance feedback. Now, I must admit, I didn't expect that result to be so strong. But in fact, what I'm going to do is to make this easy to understand. I mean, what we're talking about here is that all of these numbers are statistical means of the answers to these questions. But we recast the data in a slightly different way, and we said, what percentage of the population said that they would score this reason as being a 4 or above? And what we mean by that is that if somebody's scoring at a 4, what it means is that they agree or strongly agree that that was the main reason they left their job. Now, as you can see, this places the data in a slightly clearer kind of a framework, because what it does is it really says, for people, this was virtually their main reason for leaving their particular job. Now, you can't really see it in this data, but there's a couple of observations I would make about this data. Point number 1 is that people rarely leave a job for only one reason. Quite often they'll leave a job for one reason more than anything else. And you can see that only 1% of the people that we sampled said, I left for personal reasons not related to the job. And so that could be, I had to become a carer, or I had to relocate to follow a partner, or whatever. Anyway, the essence of what we see here is that about 35% of people took a more exciting opportunity. Fantastic. That's a nice positive reason for changing jobs. I'm not sure that you would want 33% of the Australian population changing jobs because of the fact that they were not getting clear performance guidance. And that certainly is within the purview of any organisation to improve. Although I'd have to say that performance systems, when I work with organisations, I'm often known to be very critical of performance systems because most of them are too complicated. Most of them do not focus on issues that are of real importance to leaders and staff, and many of them ignore really important points, such as things that should be subjectively assessed. I do have a masterclass in performance management coming up in the next couple of weeks' time. If you're interested in coming along to that, do register quickly because that's getting good numbers. But I think that having good performance systems is important. The other thing that I talk about from time to time is the fact that I believe that most jobs in Australia are extremely poorly defined. And what I mean by that is that most jobs are defined in terms of a list of tasks. If you want to have clarity about a job and thereby be able to give good performance feedback, you have to define jobs in terms of outcomes rather than tasks. And virtually every job description that we see in our recruitment practice is a task-based job description. An outcome-based job description looks different. It's much shorter. And you would really focus on, let's say, between 4 and 7 outcomes in any job. And my contention is that you can define any job that way. So I think that performance management is not done well in Australia, or in fact in most places in the world. But I think one of the reasons for that is because job definition is not done well, and there will be a webinar coming up on job definition. In fact, I sometimes say that that reminds me of the newspaper here in Melbourne. We had a newspaper for some time called MX, which you got free on the train, and I always remember when I read that newspaper, there was a column there which was headed "Boring but Important." And I think job definition fits into that category. It's boring, but it's really important. And certainly, if you look at research into engagement, not having a clearly defined job is a big problem from an engagement point of view. Now, you see, the third most common reason was to move to a better paying job. Great, okay, that's optimistic. This is a little bit less optimistic, I think you would say. Bad relationship with my supervisor. So what that says is that nearly a quarter of the Australian workforce is leaving their job because of a bad relationship with their supervisor. Sad, really, 1 in 4. And remember, 2,000 people, you could assume that at least, for the most part, the people who filled this thing in were people who were in sort of professional, white-collarish type of jobs, admin, finance, direct care, sales, all those sorts of white-collarish type jobs. Across all those sectors, nearly a quarter of people were leaving because of a bad relationship with a supervisor, and obviously that's a concern. That may be why we're getting such huge interest in anything that we push out at the moment about research into engagement, because bad relationship with my supervisor means lowly engaged. And we have good research on what kind of behaviours of leaders cause people to be highly engaged, but clearly it's not happening if you're going to get 23% of people leaving their job because of it. This is an interesting one. The job turned out to be different from what I expected. So I think that there's 2 things that we have to bear in mind there. One is the marketing kind of aspect. How did we represent this job? Because clearly, there's an issue there about people understanding exactly what the job is. But the second is this question of how we recruited people. Did we recruit people who were not suited to the job, and so therefore when they get in, they found out that it was different from what they expected? In any event, there are recruitment things that can be done to improve that. Organisation was perceived to be unsettled, a negative environment, 18%. Work was not meaningful, 16%. Job was too demanding or stressful, 16%. Negative experiences with colleagues, 14.6%. So some variety there. Moving on, just a really interesting question. Do the reasons for changing job vary by industry? So let's look at the data. Here we have agriculture, forestry and fishery, in effect primary industries. And you see here that we have a little bit of a difference from the overall results. The absence of clear performance feedback jumps right to the top. And bad relationship with my supervisor is also pretty close to the top. So what that suggests is that for some reason in the agriculture, forestry and fishery businesses, the quality of leadership is not quite as high as it is in the general population. If you're listening to me from a farm right now, you might bear that in mind, perhaps especially if you're a leader, but also if you're a follower. Move to more exciting opportunity is only 3rd, whereas in the overall data it's 1st. Job turned out to be different from what I expected. is strong, and also an unsettled environment jumps up quite high as well. If we look at communication services, so these are companies associated with data, there are companies associated with telcos, companies associated with, let's say, internet service providers, those sorts of things, move to a more exciting opportunity. Number one, absence of clear performance feedback, move to a better paying job. So reasonably similar to the overall data. Construction, mining and manufacturing. Now, number one reason is now absence of clear performance feedback. And so what that says is that people in the sector are really leaving their jobs because they're not getting this clear performance feedback. That's a really interesting finding. Move to a more exciting opportunity. In fact, I guess the way the mining sector is at the moment, you would sort of congratulate anybody who could find a more exciting opportunity. It's certainly tough times in that sector. And maybe that's why the third is organisation was perceived to be unsettled, because that sector is going through some tough times. And I guess it's distinctly possible that people are responding to these tough times by, in effect, having a more chaotic internal environment in their organisations. But in any event, that's quite a high rating. The job turned out to be different from what I expected, is also up there. Education, absence of clear performance feedback is the number one reason for people leaving in the education sector. This always intrigues me. I mean, I can't tell you how often we get education data which says that education is not good at telling people how they're going. It fascinates me because teachers, don't they mark the students all the time? So, and in fact, I've helped some educational institutions implement performance management, and metricated performance management is often very strongly resisted by teachers, which again seems ironic because they don't seem to have any problem at all marking their students' work. But move to a more exciting opportunity. Job turns out to be different from what I expected, and unsettled environment tends to be high for schools as well. Electricity, gas, water and waste services, so these are utility type companies, move to a more exciting opportunity. I mean, what could be more exciting than this sector after all? And there we go, 3.33 says that we are moving into more exciting opportunity. Job turned out to be different from what I expected is the number two, and the absence of clear performance feedback drops way down. So who knows, maybe they're good at giving feedback in the electricity, gas and water sector, because overall this absence of performance feedback is number two across the overall data. Finance and insurance, more exciting opportunity, absence of clear performance feedback. Unsettled environment seems to be a strong characteristic, and we know that there's lots of rationalisation in the finance sector. Job turned out to be different, very common reason in different sectors. Government, administration and defence, move to more exciting opportunity. Well, once more, a very exciting sector, I'm sure you'd agree. But absence of clear performance feedback, organisation perceived to be unsettled. So unsettled organisation, and I guess one of the things that you get a lot in the government sector is what's called machinery of government changes. You get a change of government, change of minister, and you get all kinds of changes taking place. Who knows, maybe that's a contributor. Health and community services, so these are health organisations, hospitals, those sorts of things, but it's also things like aged care, disability, and the number one reason that people change their jobs there is this one, move to a more exciting opportunity. Absence of clear performance feedback is number two, move to a better paying job. Job turned out to be different from what I expected, organisation. So in effect, you see that the health and community services sector pretty much tracks the overall data. The results are really quite typical. Bad relationship with my supervisor, too demanding and stressful. And if you go back to the original slide, and as I said earlier, if you want these slides, you can get them, but they're pretty much in keeping with what you would see across the data. Personal and other services, so that might be things like cleaning, it might be things like hairdressing, those kind of things. Personal services, move to a more exciting opportunity, absence of clear performance feedback, not a great deal to see there. And finally, property and business services, absence of clear performance, pretty typical results. Retail and wholesale. So then, because we are courageous here at SACS, I always like to ask the difficult question, and the difficult question that you must ask is there a difference between men and women in why they change jobs? Well, let's have a look at the data and see what it says. Now, you see that once more we are a very traditional organisation. What we have here is pink for girls and blue for boys. And you will see that the reasons for leaving jobs map each other almost exactly. All right. Now, I didn't bother to run this through a statistical significance test of difference. It would be very easy to do so, but those of you who understand a little bit about stats is that once you get to a sample size of 2,000, you don't need much of a difference to get a statistically significant difference. The point that I want to make here is that there is really no meaningful difference. There's no, what we call in science, there's no effect size here. So I'm going to say that the reason that men and women change jobs seems to be pretty much the same. Do reasons vary with age? Do older people leave their jobs for different reasons from younger people? That's a really interesting question of itself, isn't it? And in fact, yeah, these differences are quite marked, and in fact they're quite trend-like too. So moving to a more exciting opportunity, well, you do that a lot when you're younger, but the older you get, so this is the sort of purplish one is 30, greenish is 31 to 40, I don't know what you call that colour, brown maybe, taupe perhaps, 41 to 50, and the blue is 51 years or older. And what you see is the reasons for leaving, you go to a more exciting opportunity less as you get older. The other interesting thing is absence of clear performance feedback also seems to decline over age as a reason for leaving job. But on the other hand, perceiving an organisation to be unsettled or to have a negative environment tends to increase over the course of life. Not sure what's going on there. Maybe people become less patient with such things as they get older. It's hard to believe that younger people work for less unsettled organisations. So I would say that maybe there's something going on with the people who are assessed. We know that as people become older, they do become a little bit more stress sensitive and a little bit less tolerant. The job turned out to be different from what I expected. Increases slightly over the course of 30 to 50, but once you are in the 50 category, maybe you know what you're looking for or something, but the job turned out to be different from what I expected is not a big reason. Move to a better paying job, you can see that really has a strong age effect. Older people tend to do that way less than younger people. Bad relationship with my supervisor. Now, I don't know whether this is to do with kind of getting a little bit grumpy or less tolerant as we age, but older people seem to leave their job much more commonly than younger people. And again, maybe it's, well, I'm not putting up with this, I realise I don't have to, or maybe it is that we do get perhaps a fraction less tolerant as we age. Work is not meaningful. And so what we see here is that this declines quite markedly, and maybe as one gets older, I think what might be going on here is that as people age, they begin to learn the jobs, or they begin to get themselves in jobs which are meaningful to them. So, because I guess if you're 25 and you're still trying to find your métier, as the French would call it, in other words, a job that you truly believe in, something that you really think is for me, maybe you take another 5-10 years to find that. Certainly older people leaving jobs because their work is not meaningful is much lower. Kind of reassuring that, isn't it? As you age, your work gets more meaningful. Job too demanding or stressful, and what we're saying here is that people, when they're young, perceive it to be so, but it tends to decline as people age. And who knows, maybe that's something to do with experience or capability or whatever. Negative experiences with colleagues is really interesting because what it says is that people, when they're younger, tend not to have that. When they're kind of 30 to 50, they tend to have it. And once you're over 50, you don't tend to have the problems with your colleagues anymore. And I left for personal reasons not related to job. Well, as people age, that increases, and you would have to imagine that health, both of the person's, the person's own health and the health of people around them might be a contributor to that, as to just in a pure statistical sense. What about with salary? I wonder if better paid people leave for different reasons from less well paid people. So here the colour coding is the same. You have the more highly paid people at the bottom and the less highly paid people at the top. And what you see is 0 to 20. So that kind of suggests that they're casuals or part-timers. And then 21 to 50, 50 to 70 and so forth. And what you see is move to a more exciting opportunity. Well, probably the only conclusion you could draw, because this is pretty much flat line, is that well-paid people tend to do that more often. Absence of clear performance feedback. You'll notice that starts low, it goes high, and then it declines. In other words, it seems that more highly paid people get very specific performance feedback, so they don't have to leave their jobs because of it. The organisation is perceived to be unsettled, negative environment. Interestingly, that tends to increase as you go through your levels of salary. And 150,000 to 200,000, there's a strange peak there. I guess maybe it drops off when you get to 200 plus, probably because you're the one that's doing the unsettling. The job turned out to be different from what I expected. Well-paid people seem to not get that, and I guess you'd say that's pretty much line ball at lower levels of salary. Move to a better paying job, well, again, line ball, except when you get to people who are really just starting their careers. Bad relationship with my supervisor. Now, this is really interesting because what it says is that you see this curved relationship here. So less well-paid people don't tend to have this issue with their supervisors. More well-paid people don't tend to have this relationship with their supervisors. The middle, which is the 70 to 100,000, seems to be the big problem here. Or let's say 70 to 150 because they're the two highest. Now, interestingly, when we look at the data that we've got on engagement across different levels of salary, we found exactly the same thing, that middle managers are much less engaged than either people who are too junior or too senior. Now, I suppose if you're senior, you're likely to be happy because you've got an opportunity to make decisions. Maybe when you're junior, you're sort of in a direct customer contact role, so you get a gratification out of that. But suffice it to say, we found that people in the middle ranks were sort of like the meat in the sandwich. They're often passing on messages from more senior management to staff who maybe aren't all that keen on the message. And maybe that's one of the reasons why the relationships with supervisors aren't good, because we found that people in middle ranks certainly reported that they were less empowered than people who are high or low. Work was not meaningful. Now, this is just a really strong linear relationship. The more you get paid, the more meaningful your work is. You would hope so. Job too demanding and stressful, interestingly, declines as you go up the ranks of seniority. Now, I know that people might think, well, as people go up the ranks of seniority, their job becomes more stressful. Well, look, we know that as you go up the ranks of seniority, your job becomes more complex. But actually, I think what's going on here is a thing called IQ. People with higher IQ tend to be more stress tolerant than people with lower IQs. And the income is a very good predictor of IQ. You find there are a number of studies where people have graphed IQ against income, and low IQ means in a population low income, and in a population high IQ means high income. Now, at an individual level, that doesn't hold. So you can get somebody who is paid $50,000 and is a genius, sure. But if you're going to talk about thousands of people, that's the effect that you get. So I suspect that the reason that people are coping or not leaving jobs with stress as they get up the ladder, one is that they might think, well, look, this workload comes with the territory. But also, IQ can contribute to resilience, and maybe you're getting more resilient people that actually make their way up the corporate ladder. People who are low in resilience often reach their glass ceiling lower earlier on. Negative experiences with colleagues, well, as you can see, it seems to decline once you get to about the $20,000 mark. So the more senior, the less likely it is that you have negative experiences with colleagues. And who knows, maybe increasing power through seniority is a contributor to that. Personal reasons not related to job. What you see is that poorly or lowly paid people get that happening more often. And I suspect that that's because they're part-time, and they may well be part-time because they have responsibilities that ultimately make it likely that they leave their jobs because of those responsibilities. And the rest of that is pretty much a flat line. So one of the other things that I wanted to do, now because we have data on a whole bunch of stuff associated with personality and values, what I did is that I wanted to see if we had personality and values data on some of the people who completed this. And in fact, we had this data on a lot of people. We had data in the following forms. This is a thing called the HEXACO model of personality. It's also known as the six-factor model of personality, and the reason it's called the six-factor model of personality, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these things. It's also called the HEXACO, H for honesty, humility, E for emotionality, X for extroversion. Yes, I know, maybe it should be called the HEXACO, but they liked HEXACO better. A for agreeableness, C for conscientiousness, O for openness. The HEXACO model of personality, developed by Kibium Lee and Mike Ashton in 2004 to 2007, turns out to be a very good predictor of work performance. And that's why most of our clients use the HEXACO. We have a couple of other personality measures. So you can imagine people have filled in these reasons as to why they left their jobs, and we have personality data on them. So that's kind of interesting. But as well as that, sorry, I'll just very briefly go through the HEXACO. Honesty, humility is the H, means I'm honest and I am not arrogant. And the two things link because it turns out that arrogant people have enormous difficulty being honest. Nobody made this up, incidentally. This was all derived from research. Emotionality, how emotionally stable or unstable I am. Extroversion, the degree to which I am a kind of a confident people person who likes people, and also I'm cheery and optimistic. Agreeableness, how approachable am I versus angry? That's what agreeableness means. Conscientiousness means hard-working, well-organised. Openness to experience means I'm broad-minded, I like new things. And this altruism scale means I'm kind of soft-hearted, I like to help people. Then we have values, and this is the Schwartz values model. Shalom Schwartz is regarded in many circles as the #1 researcher in values in the world. He's certainly one of the most cited in the scientific literature. And he discovered that there are 10 values that really affect people in their day-to-day life. And these are as follows. Power is the degree to which I want to dominate people. Achievement is the degree to which I'm ambitious. And it's sort of achievement in a social sense. I want to get on in life. So if I'm highly achievement orientated here, I want promotion, I want a nicer house, I want a better title on my business card, that kind of thing. Hedonism is about having pleasurable experiences. Stimulation is about variety and being prepared to embrace risk in order to get variety. Self-direction is all about I want to run my own show and I want to think my own way. Universalism is all about I want to make the world a better place. We are now getting into the not-for-profit sector of the values profile. Many of our not-for-profit clients are extremely high on universalism. That's why they get into that sector. Benevolence means I want to help people. Universalism is sort of more like a theoretical, I want to make the world a better place. Benevolence is I want to help this person in front of me right here and right now, and I want to be able to be relied on. Conformity means I will obey rules. Tradition means I am the sort of person who obeys either my religion or my family or the dictates of my society. Security conscious people are people who are the sorts of people who don't like risk. Now, values are goals. That's truly what the definition of values is. Values are not aspirations, they're not, and they're really quite specific goals. So if somebody scores high on power, what that means is that that person has a belief that it's a good thing to have power over other people. If somebody scores high on benevolence, what that means is that they believe that it's a good thing to do kind things for people. Now you'll notice that there are some things that are opposite each other. That means that they are opposite psychologically. So it's very hard for a truly ambitious person to be equally benevolent. It does happen at an individual level, but that's difficult. It can be a values clash. All right, so that's values. Difference between personality and values. Personality largely genetically determined. Let's say between 50 and 70%. I think more like 70, but people argue about that. Values seem to be largely learned. So it's sort of like the nature-nurture equation of why people do things. If you're going to try and predict things at work using values or personality, personality is a way better predictor than values, I think largely because it is a genetic thing. Now, what we did, I left the job for personal reasons not related to the job. So now this model is a mathematical model where you are asking for the predictive capacity of these things to predict this. All right. Now we plucked these out. We ran a statistical test. We found that these were the best predictors. We haven't put all of the personality and values components. In other words, we haven't got 25 values and 25 personality characteristics and 10. You can see we've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 or something here. So what we did is we ran it through where we just picked out the main predictors. So I left for personal reasons not related to the job. Now we're predicting this with 23% accuracy. That's what this adjusted R-square means. Now I think that's really interesting because what it says is that a quarter of the reasons that if you think of 1,000 people who left for personal reasons, a quarter of them are actually leaving just because of the way they're made up. In other words, psychologically they're different from the rest of the population because values and personality predict this pretty well. I mean, this was very statistically significant. Anybody who's ever done any correlational research will know that a correlation of 0.5 is not to be ignored. So the adjusted R-squared here, 23% accuracy. So what type of people leave for personal reasons not related to the job? Well, people who are low in perfectionism. What that means is that these are people who are maybe a little bit disorganized. So it's distinctly possible that their lack of organization caused them to be, I guess, not getting their act together in such a way that it put pressure on them at work. That's a possibility. People who are low in perfectionism, people who are high in perfectionism, which is a sort of a dotting the I's and crossing the T's mentality, may well have stuck around because they might have been able to combine work and their home life, let's say. Stimulation. That's very interesting. People who are highly committed to, so V for values, people who are highly committed to stimulation might leave for personal reasons not related to the job. So who knows, maybe the personal reason was that there was just something else that I wanted to do that wasn't work related, and so I took it on. Sentimental people tend to leave for personal reasons not related to the job. What that means is that people who are sentimental, they're people who emotionally bond with other people. And I guess if you're in a carer responsibility, your feeling that you should care for somebody may be what drove you to quit. Traditional people, it's really interesting. So maybe people who are high in tradition come from family or social settings where they're expected to care for people. And so perhaps that was one of the things that drove it. And finally, people who are low in liveliness are likely to leave for personal reasons not related to job. That's why it's got a negative side. People who are low in liveliness. Now, what's going on there, I suspect, is that people who are gloomy may, and if liveliness is low enough, that can mean depressiveness. People who are gloomy might leave for personal reasons not related to the job because they might weigh on them. So I think that's kind of interesting. Bad relationship with supervisor. Now, this doesn't give you a very good R-squared. I mean, we're only about 14% here, but again, it was quite statistically significant. So what this says is that people who are low in stimulation tend to have bad relationships with their supervisor. Low in stimulation means people who do not like variety or change. Their values is, I don't like variety or change. Well, maybe that causes me to get on badly with my supervisor, particularly if the supervisor is asking me to change. You'll notice here also people who are high in tradition are the sort of people who tend to have bad relationships with the supervisor. So and I suspect what's going on there is that people who are traditional may well have perspectives on things that are not the supervisor's perspectives, and they feel that they should follow their traditional perspective rather than the supervisor's perspective. But here's my favourite. Lively and cheerful and optimistic and chirpy people can have bad relationships with supervisors. Well, I suppose if the supervisor's miserable, that may well give rise to this effect. Highly cheerful people tend to have bad relationships with supervisors. Not all the time, but we're talking about quite a big beta weight there. Socially bold people can have bad relationships with supervisors. I reckon what's happening there is socially bold people are the sort of people who will tend to want to fight with their supervisor. And also people who are low in greed can have bad relationships with supervisors. I wonder if that's because the supervisor's a little bit greedy. Anyway, interesting results. And what you're seeing is that you could say of the people who leave for bad relationships with supervisors, a slice of them, let's say maybe 14% or something, are leaving because of the fact that they don't have the kind of personal makeup that allows them to get on with that supervisor. But this is really interesting because we're talking about now an R-squared. So this is where people say, my work was not meaningful. 30% of this nearly is accounted for by personality and values. And what that says is that really when people say, my work is not meaningful, that says as much about them as it does about the job. So certain types of people find their work not meaningful. What type? Well, these best predictors here, fairness, people who are low in fairness. That means people who are kind of manipulative, who want to get on ahead of other people unfairly. They will find the work not meaningful more often than people who are not that way. But almost paradoxically, people who are not greedy will find the work not meaningful. And the reason that that might be the case is because maybe greed, the feeling that I'm earning money for this, tends to cause people to feel that the work is meaningful. that there is some psychological evidence that when people are faced with a situation where they're doing something that they don't like, but they're well paid for it, they can actually pump up in their own mind the value of the work in order to keep the salary. People who are low in sincerity find the work not meaningful. People who are low in sincerity are the sort of people who want to flatter and cajole and that kind of thing. Liveliness, people who are gloomy may not find their work meaningful. People who are highly organised and driven might find their work not meaningful, and that may well be because they're getting through a lot of it and not getting much satisfaction from it. Organisation was perceived to be unsettled, so you're getting a 20% effect size out of that. People who are low in forgiveness tend to perceive their organisation to be unsettled, so people who hold grudges. Again, generous people might perceive their organisation to be unsettled, and that could easily be because of the fact that they're perceiving their colleagues to be disadvantaged. So their generosity makes them want to perceive the organisation to be negative. Hedonistic people who are low in hedonism tend to find the organisation negative. Now, what that means is that party goers should have less problems with negative environments, maybe because they're coping better. People who are patient, who are not angry type people, maybe they're not getting the satisfaction of venting or something, but people who are low in fairness will tend to perceive the organisation to be unsettled. Negative experiences with colleagues. People who are low in hedonism tend to have worse experience with their colleagues. I guess that's because they're, once more, not having pleasurable experiences with them, or perhaps lightening the environment by pleasurable experiences. Manipulative people who are low in fairness tend to have negative experiences with colleagues. People who are high in universalism, and the not-for-profit sector certainly experiences this, because people who are high in universalism can tend to have negative experiences with colleagues because they can be very principled, almost to the point of being zealots. And so that could easily explain. Very gentle people can have negative experiences with colleagues, and I suspect that what's going on there is that they are not asserting themselves enough. People who are very gentle can be difficult to work with sometimes because they're so yielding that you don't really know what they think. And finally, people who are low in dependence can have difficult experiences with colleagues, and that could well be because of the fact that their independence causes them to just say what they want to do and strike out. Okay, so actions to reduce turnover and increase retention. Well, I guess one of the things that I would say about all of this is that if we go right back to the start, not that far back to the start, in fact, to this slide here. Now, if you look at these top 10 reasons, now there are also some things that I should say that didn't come out. We didn't get "I am badly paid" as a driver for people leaving at all. So mathematically what you've got here is the 10 most common and most supported reasons. But if you look at these, move to a more exciting opportunity, well, you could say that's not really in our control. But absence of clear performance feedback, that is in our control. Move to a better paying job, well, you could say, all right, they just wanted to advance themselves. So let's say that's not really a matter. Bad relationship with my supervisor, well, that is in our control. Job turned out to be different from what expected, well, that is in my control. I should let people know what this job is. The organisation was perceived to be unsettled. Well, leadership can cause people to perceive organisations to be settled and effective. Work was not meaningful, job too demanding, stressful, negative experiences with colleagues. Anyway, the key thing that I'm trying to say here is that the vast majority of these are things that are within the purview of an organisation to mend, and certainly if people lead in such a way that they increase engagement, then they should be able to mend these things. Now, I think that it's worthwhile looking at this data to understand in a sector sense what it is that is the key drivers for you in each of your organisations, and to make decisions about what you might like to do about this. But what we're also doing is we're building a tool so that you can measure this in your own organisation. We're building a thing called the post-exit survey. And the way the post-exit survey will work is that you will subscribe to it through the SACS portal. And what you'll do is that you'll run this thing in the background, and anytime somebody leaves, you load up their name and email address into this device. The device will wait about a month, and then it will email people with a questionnaire which says this result is not going to the organisation, it's going to SACS, and it will only be reported to the client in a a de-individuated aggregated form. So you sign up, you get people completing this thing as they leave, and then what happens is the moment you get 3 people, because 3 means that you can't identify any individual's results, the results come back to the organisation in the form of a report. A PDF icon will pop up in your portal, and you click on that and it will tell you the reasons that people are leaving your organisation based on these 10 main reasons, and it will also give you an opportunity to norm your results against your organisation's sector or the market as a whole. And what that will do is it will allow you to understand whether your reasons for leaving are the same as or different from other employers, and that will give you an idea about whether you want to do anything. So let's say you're losing 40% of your people due to the fact of bad relationships with supervisors, and you know that the normative result is 23%. Well, that's worth knowing. But also the opposite is worth knowing. We're losing 10% of our people through bad relationships with supervisors. That's really good, and you might even put that as part of your employee value proposition. People like their leaders here. Things like absence of clear performance feedback. Well, firstly, I think everybody needs to work on this, because when you get 1/3 of the Australian workforce quitting their jobs because of the fact that they don't have clear performance guidance, that's a problem. But if you're higher, well, that's a real problem. If you're lower, so much the better. But I think you get the picture. Once you've got this data, you can make some decisions about what you want to do about this. And I guess the key thing is, I ran this in a workshop form, face-to-face workshop form, day before yesterday, and the key message is that if we know this stuff, we can decide what we want to do about it, and we can keep the people that we want to keep. That's the real point here. The other thing I should say is that when you work on your reasons for leaving, that also makes your organisation better at attracting the people that you want to attract as well. So in summary, we know the reasons now why people leave their jobs. We know that they vary somewhat from sector to sector. We know that they vary quite considerably across age and salary. We know that they don't vary across male and female. And now also we know some of the data about what personal characteristics like personality and values that cause people to leave their jobs. That's all I wanted to cover off today. As I said earlier, if you want a copy of the webinar in terms of the notes or the recording or both, just let us know. Have a great day, everyone.